Dollemocracy. Facing down pessimistic politics with realistic optimism.
One thing we've talked a lot about on the show has been the ongoing sexual abuse crisis within the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. And another report...
For years and years and years and years and years, we've talked about it.
Another report has been released revealing the scope of abuse spanning 80 years at the Archdiocese of Baltimore. And this involves more than 150 Catholic priests that abused over 600 children and escaped accountability in a way that has become an enduring pattern at this point when it comes to the Catholic Church. That means that they knowingly are abusing children, the priests, and instead of being dealt with in terms of getting them out of the church, getting them away from kids, getting them into custody, getting them consequences that they need. They are instead protected, moved to other locations where they then have access to other kids. And the reason we wanted to talk about this is because, like you said, we've been talking about it for years on this show, and it continues to be a problem. And the priests continue to evade consequences, and children are not being protected. And instead of conservatives focusing on this, which seems to be a pretty important and significant issue.
Well, especially by their metric. They're the ones who talk about groomers and pedophiles and sex trafficking and harming children and save the children, the QAnon people proclaim.
They focus on the trans community.
That's right.
And so we wanted to play an interview here with PBS's Jeffrey Bennett and the person who released the report, which his name is escaping me at this time, but I believe he's the Attorney General of Maryland.
Anthony Brown is the Attorney General of Maryland and joins us now. Thank you for being with us. Your investigation found that over 600 young people, from preschoolers to young adults, suffered sexual abuse and physical torture in some cases by clergy members from the 1940s through 2002. That's the year at which this investigation ended. Clergy in some cases preyed on children who were recovering in hospitals. Give us a sense of the full picture of depravity and evil that your investigation uncovered in the church.
You know, that's a tall order in that we interviewed, as you mentioned, close to 600 survivors, many other witnesses. We reviewed hundreds of thousands of documents that were produced to us through the grand jury subpoena by the Archdiocese of Baltimore. And what we saw, and we tried to detail in the report, was pervasive abuse by priests, seminarians, deacons, and other employees of the Archdiocese, and this intentional effort by the Catholic Church hierarchy to conceal this abuse. There was physical abuse and mental abuse. There was sexual abuse and rape. And this occurred between the abusers who had positions of power and authority and some of the most vulnerable people in our society, children who are devoted to the Catholic Church, and yet were abused over and over again by the very people who are entrusted to care for these children.
So this was one of the themes, really, of the report, was that the abuse was pervasive and the church was more focused on protecting its reputation, protecting the priests, than they were protecting the children that were coming forward. And oftentimes the children, you know, if they had worked up the courage to go and tell a priest that something was happening to them, that in some cases they actually told another abusive priest who was abusing kids,
right,
who then is not concerned at all with the safety of that child, but again is more concerned with protecting themselves. And so later on in this interview, they talked to David Lorenz, the Maryland State Director of the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. And it was a pretty moving response that he had to the report.
In preparing to speak with you, Mr. Attorney General, we spoke with David Lorenz. He's the Maryland State Director of the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, also known as SNAP. And he said that this report gives him some sense of relief.
Vindication is too weak a word, and I don't have a better word. It is a release. It's a vindication. It's being able to take that off and hand it to someone else and say, the weight of this abuse doesn't belong on me, doesn't belong on my shoulders. It belongs on someone else, and it belongs at the foot of the Catholic Church.
I'm sure you've heard a similar sentiment from many of the survivors that you've spoken with. Mr. Lorenz wants to know when your office plans to investigate the two other dioceses that include parts of Maryland, the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., and the Diocese of Wilmington, Delaware, which covers part of the Eastern Shore.
And I thank Mr. Lorenz for his advocacy on behalf of survivors. I had the privilege to meet with the survivors yesterday in my office before we publicly released this report. And it was clear to me that for many, if not most, of the survivors, yesterday was truly a day of reckoning and public accounting, a detailed report of what they had to endure at the time of the abuse and throughout their lives since. I try to convey to them that we're listening, we believe them, and we'll continue to be there for them. So 4 years ago, when the investigation was initiated by my predecessor, Attorney General Brian Frosch of the Archdiocese of Baltimore, the Office of Attorney General also initiated investigations of the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. and the Diocese of Wilmington, Delaware. Those investigations are ongoing. We have issued subpoenas. We have not sat idle. My predecessor, I think, made an important and sound decision to focus on the Archdiocese of Baltimore so that we could complete that report and make it public as soon as possible. And now we will continue the efforts to investigate the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. and the Diocese of Wilmington, Delaware.
And we welcome those investigations. Now, look, this isn't just a Catholic Church problem. This is a problem within any of these insular communities that want to protect the organization at the stake of or in lieu of protecting children. The Mormon Church is going through something very similar right now. The Jehovah's Witnesses have had their thing. It is disgusting and sinister that you would hold up the church, meaning the particular corporation like the Catholic Church or the Mormon Church, above the health and well-being and safety and security of children. It goes against what you claim it is that you stand for. So I hope that these organizations are held accountable. I mean, there are archdioceses that have filed for bankruptcy because they can't handle the weight of the judgments against them. And the Catholic Church from the very top needs to stand up and speak out against this and not keep getting caught again and again and again and again with hundreds of abused children in the wake.
Yes.
It's just gross.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we would welcome your thoughts on that, 657-464-7609, or you can send an email to idoubtit@dollemore.com.